It is a scary world right now. There's just so much that feels uncertain. We hear of people getting sick, and we even hear of people dying. We don't know when these problems with the coronavirus are going to end. Many of us are locked up in our houses, and we're thinking about the future, and the future seems frightening. We know that many people are probably going to lose their jobs. The world economy seems very unstable. It is a scary time, and yet this scary time is also an opportunity. It feels like God is giving us an opportunity, almost as if He hit the pause button on the world and hit the pause button on our life in order to slow us down so that we have time to think about what really matters and what is really valuable. It's important that you take some time to think about what really matters and what is really valuable, because we have so many people for so long telling us what is valuable and telling us what is important, and we're being given this vision basically from birth of what is significant and what we should desire. And so often that vision that we're being given and those things that people are telling us are so important are very different than what God Himself says actually matters. I was thinking this morning of Luke chapter 9, where Jesus is talking to His followers, and He tells them something shocking. He says, if you are going to follow me, you're going to have to pick up your cross. He actually says, I am going to the cross, and if you're going to come after me, if you're going to be one of my disciples, you need to pick up your cross. We serve a Savior. We follow Jesus. We follow someone who was crucified. We follow a crucified Savior. And if we're going to follow this Savior, Jesus says, we have to be willing to die. At the very least, die to self. And that is shocking. That is a shocking thing to say. You can imagine the disciples as they heard it, especially because they were very familiar with crosses and with crucifixion. You must be willing to pick up your cross. Why? Why in the world would I be willing to pick up my cross? Well, Jesus gives a motivation. He says, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit? And this is the part I want you to hear. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? Now think about that statement. Jesus is saying, imagine there's someone who gains the whole world. Not just part of the world. The whole world is literally his. Everything you see belongs to him. Jesus says, well, what's the value in that? What's the value in that? He has the whole world. Jesus says, what is the value if he actually owns everything but loses his soul? He's talking about the value of the soul, or the value of the salvation of a soul. And he's making a comparison. And he's saying, compare the value of the salvation of one soul with owning everything in the world, owning absolutely everything in the world. Which is more valuable? The salvation of a soul is more valuable than owning everything in the world. Now that shocks a lot of us. Jesus is talking about what matters. Do we think about what matters the way that Jesus does? That's so shocking that we need a little proof. Stuff seems valuable to us. Most of us have spent most of our life pursuing more stuff. This is what we think matters. How can it be that the value of a salvation of a soul is more significant, more important? It matters. It's more valuable than material possessions. Well, Jonathan Edwards many years ago preached a sermon in which he gave a number of proofs. Let me share just a couple of those with you here. He says, first of all, think about the actual value of stuff. We're so easily fooled, but is stuff as valuable as we tend to think it is? First of all, it doesn't last forever. It all comes to an end. If it doesn't break before you die, you aren't going to be able to keep it once you die. Second, you're not going to be able to enjoy your stuff forever. What good did it do, he says, that Alexander the Great conquered the whole world when he lay dying? He had to leave that world he conquered to the next guy. And though he conquered the world, in the end, death conquered him just like it does us all. And he whom the world could not contain, the world seemed too small for Alexander the Great, but at the end, he had to be contained by just a few small square feet of ground. Even if you do get stuff, you can't enjoy it very long, and it's very difficult to actually enjoy what you got. Enjoying your stuff is hard. You think it's going to bring so much pleasure, but once you get it, so often, what do you want? You want something else. And the stuff you do get, you just physically aren't even capable of enjoying for that long, because it's not very long before you get old. And once you're old, you have all these aches and pains, and those things that you work so hard for aren't nearly as enjoyable to you as they once were. And even if you were somehow able to get all the stuff in the world, it wouldn't be as valuable as you might think. It's not worth that much. Take riches. Riches are of little worth because they don't usually bring much satisfaction. Jonathan Edwards says, worldly riches are so far from bringing satisfaction with them, the more one has of them, the more we want. Who would think much of a drink? Imagine you're thirsty and you take a drink because you think it's going to satisfy your thirst, but that drink you drink actually only makes you more thirsty. That's not a very good drink, and that's riches. The more you have, the more you want. There are many different reasons why stuff isn't nearly as valuable as we might think. But there are also many different reasons why the salvation of the soul is more valuable than we might think. Think about what the soul is saved from, and think about what the soul is saved to. What is the soul saved from? The soul that is not saved will never again experience any sort of pleasure. Edwards says, they will have taken their leave then out of all the riches, honors, and pleasures of the world, which they used to hug and make a god of. Their dear lusts, once they died, which were so dear to them that they would not part with them for heaven, that they would not let go of for God himself, and all the happiness which God could bestow upon them. They must part with them for nothing now, never to enjoy anything like them again. If they've been used to please themselves by the handling of silver and gold with the shining of precious stones and jewels, they shall enjoy no more of them forever. If they've been used to gorgeous apparel and to deck themselves with shining and glistening robes, they shall never more be clothed with any other sort of garments but scorching and tormenting flames, which will wrap themselves about their otherwise naked bodies forever. If they've been used to dwell in proud and stately palaces upon earth, they will have nothing for their home then but the bottomless pit and the dismal dungeon of outer darkness. Instead of lying at ease in beds of down, they shall have nothing but a sea of liquid fire for their bed, flames instead of the wine and strong drink with which they used to intoxicate themselves. They shall have nothing but the cup of God's wrath and fiery anger, which they shall be compelled forever to drink. We tend to think stuff is more valuable than it really is, and we tend to think the salvation of the soul is less valuable than it really is. And if you want to remember or appreciate how valuable the salvation of the soul is, think about what the soul is saved from. The soul that dies will never experience any pleasure again. The soul that dies that's not saved will never experience any pleasure again, ever. A soul that's not saved will only experience pain. The soul that is not saved will never experience pleasure and only experience pain forever. This is bad news, but what's the good news? What is the soul that is saved to? What does that soul experience? The soul that is saved from all sorts of evil. That means The soul that is saved will never experience temptation or affliction any longer, ever. The soul that is saved will be brought to the enjoyment of all good. Every single part of him will be completely satisfied. Edwards says, in heaven, all the faculties of the soul shall be completely satisfied. To see a God of unending glory and majesty face to face, to see him as he is and to know him as we are known, there to be admitted into the most intimate acquaintance with him, to be embraced as in his arms. This is such a privilege as Moses himself could not be admitted to while on earth. The vision of God will be so intimate and clear as to transform the soul into the likeness of God. The soul that is saved will not experience any suffering and will only experience all joy forever. Given the value of the soul and really the relative lack of value in material possessions, how should we then live? That's the question. You are being given an opportunity right now. God has hit the pause button on your world. He wants you to think about what matters. You have to think about what matters because so often the world has been putting the wrong price tags on things. And we think what really matters is getting more and more stuff, getting more financial prosperity in this world, comfort, ease, all of that right now. And while all of that is nice and certainly something to enjoy, it's not nearly as valuable as we might think. Jesus says, you could have all of that, but the salvation of one soul, the salvation of your soul is much more valuable. What difference does it make if we believe that? Well, we should be careful that we don't lose our souls. If we look out around us, if we think back to what it was like before the coronavirus, we see men, they're busy pursuing all kinds of things. But how many of those same men are as busy pursuing the good of their soul? We should be very careful not to lose our soul, and we should do as much as we can so that other souls can be saved as well. What can we do to guard our souls? We should not do things that damage them. We should cry out to God to save our souls. We must work hard at the things that have to do with the good of our souls. We must persevere in seeking the salvation of our souls. And we must persevere in seeking the salvation of other souls. Let me close with just one last quote from Jonathan Edwards. He says, "Is it not a great pity that things which are so precious as souls are should be lost? Should we not, if we saw any man in distress of body and in great danger of dying, be willing to lend him a hand to save his life? Why, let us look about us, and we shall see thousands of men in a sorrowful condition and in danger of dying every moment. Should we see a man drowning, should we not be willing to afford him some assistance to help him out of the water? If we look about, we may see thousands of poor souls drowning in sin and in danger of being drowned in the lake of fire. Let us therefore do what we can for them. Perhaps we might be instrumental of saving several souls from everlasting ruin and destruction." And he tells his congregation, and I plead with you, he says, if each one here should do what he could towards the salvation of the souls of others, there is no doubt to be made that many souls might be saved as God uses their efforts. Let us therefore do our utmost. Don't let us be so inhuman as to see men spiritually sick and not help them. What matters? Being healthy is great. Experiencing financial prosperity is so nice. But it's not nearly as valuable. It's not nearly as valuable as the salvation of a soul, the salvation of your soul, salvation of the souls around you. Do you believe that? Does your life demonstrate that you believe that? God's given you a chance now to evaluate. Don't miss it.